Have you ever noticed how exhausted you become when you are trying to make life happen exactly the way you think it should? You want someone to understand you. You want a relationship to work. You want an answer to arrive. You want the uncertainty to end. You want the next chapter to begin. And somewhere inside you, there is a quiet voice saying, if I can just make this happen, then I will finally be at peace. But what if peace was never waiting on the other side of getting what you want? What if peace begins at the very moment you stop demanding that life become different before you allow yourself to feel whole? There are times when you may not even realize how much you are forcing. You call it trying. You call it caring. You call it holding things together. You tell yourself that if you think about the problem long enough, perhaps you will discover the one thought that solves it. If you explain yourself one more time, perhaps that person will finally understand. If you hold on a little tighter, perhaps what is leaving will decide to stay. And slowly, without noticing, your desire for peace becomes a struggle against life itself. This struggle can be very quiet. It may happen while you are lying awake at night, replaying a conversation that ended hours ago. It may happen while you look at someone else's life and wonder why their path seems to be moving while yours feels still. It may happen when you reach a certain age and begin thinking that you should have figured everything out by now. You may feel behind, forgotten, or somehow separated from the life you imagined you would be living. And then the mind begins negotiating with reality. This should not have happened. They should have treated me differently. I should be further along. I should know what comes next. This relationship should have survived. This opportunity should have worked. My life should look different by now. Perhaps the deepest exhaustion does not come only from what happened. Perhaps some of it comes from the endless argument with what happened. A river does not become peaceful by fighting every stone in its path. It moves around what it cannot move through. It does not interpret the stone as evidence that the universe has abandoned it. It simply continues. Sometimes quickly, sometimes almost imperceptibly, but always in relationship with the landscape before it. There may be something here for you to remember. You were never asked to control every stone. You were never asked to know every bend in the river before you reached it. There is a part of you that desperately wants certainty because certainty feels like safety. This is the part we often call the ego. Not because it is evil or something you must destroy, but because it is frightened. It builds its sense of security from outcomes, identities, approval, plans, and expectations. It says, I will be safe when I know what happens next. It says, I will be worthy when this person chooses me. It says, I will be peaceful when this problem disappears. And life, with extraordinary patience, keeps inviting you to discover another possibility. What if your peace does not have to wait? What if you can participate fully in your life without demanding that life obey you? There is an enormous difference between intention and force. Intention comes from clarity. Force often comes from fear. Intention says, this is what I would love to experience, and I will move toward it with an open heart. Force says, this must happen, or I cannot be okay. One creates movement, the other creates resistance. You can feel the difference in your own body. Think about something you have been trying desperately to control. Perhaps it is another person's feelings. Perhaps it is your future. Perhaps it is a decision you are afraid to make. Notice what happens inside you when you think, I have to figure this out right now. There is contraction. Now imagine saying quietly, I do not know how this will unfold, but I am willing to meet this moment as it is. Something softens. The circumstances may not have changed at all, yet your relationship with them has changed. And this is where freedom begins. It does not begin when the entire world finally cooperates with your expectations. If that were required for peace, peace would always remain fragile. Someone would only have to disappoint you, reject you, misunderstand you, or change their mind, and your peace would disappear again. A deeper peace must come from somewhere that circumstances cannot easily reach. Perhaps this is what it means to return to the source within you. You may call it God, divine intelligence, consciousness, love, or simply the quiet presence beneath your thoughts. The name matters less than the experience. Beneath all the mental noise, there is something in you that is not rushing, something that does not need to prove itself, something that does not measure your worth by whether your plans succeeded. You have touched this place before. Maybe you felt it while watching the sky change at sunset. Maybe you felt it in the silence before everyone else woke up. Maybe you felt it while sitting beside someone you loved when no words were necessary. For a few moments, You stopped trying to become anything. You stopped solving yourself. You were simply present. And strangely, nothing was missing. Then the mind returned, as minds do. It reminded you about tomorrow. It brought back the unfinished conversation, the unanswered message, the uncertainty, the old wound. And once again, you began trying to force life toward a conclusion that would make you feel secure. But the peace had not disappeared. Your attention had simply moved away from it. This is important because you may have spent years believing that peace is something you must achieve. Perhaps you have been trying to improve yourself enough to deserve it. Yet what if your deepest spiritual work is not becoming peaceful, but noticing what keeps pulling you away from the peace already present beneath the struggle? Sometimes it is fear. Sometimes it is resentment. Sometimes it is the need to be right. Sometimes it is your attachment to an image of how life was supposed to turn out. And sometimes it is love mixed with fear. You care so deeply about someone that you begin trying to manage their journey. You want to save them from pain. You want them to make the decision you believe is best. You want them to become the version of themselves you can more easily love. But love and control are very different energies. Love makes room. Fear tightens its grip. You may discover that one of the most loving things you can do is allow another person to have their own path while you remain responsible for the quality of your own inner world. You can care without controlling. You can love without possessing. You can offer guidance without demanding that it be followed. You can even let someone go without turning their departure into evidence that you were unworthy of love. The tree does not chase the leaf when autumn arrives. It releases what the season is asking it to release, not because the leaf meant nothing, but because holding what is ready to leave would violate the natural rhythm of life. There may be leaves in your life that you are still gripping, an old identity, a relationship that has changed, a regret, a dream that belonged to an earlier version of you, a need for someone's apology, a future you carefully imagined and now fear may never arrive. You do not have to throw these things away. You do not have to pretend they did not matter. You can honor what they meant while loosening your grip. That loosening is not defeat, it is trust. And perhaps trust is not believing that everything will happen exactly as you want. Perhaps trust is knowing that even when life does not follow your preferred path, you can remain connected to something within you that cannot be taken away. When you begin to understand this, a beautiful question replaces the old one. Instead of asking, how can I make life give me what I need? You begin asking, what is life inviting me to release so I can see more clearly? That question changes everything because it moves your attention from control to awareness. And awareness does not fight. It observes. It listens. It creates enough inner silence for you to recognize when fear has been pretending to be wisdom, when attachment has been pretending to be love, and when control has been pretending to be strength. There is more beneath your struggle than you may have realized. And as you begin to see the hidden patterns of the ego with compassion rather than judgment, you may discover why letting go has sometimes felt so frightening, and why the freedom you have been searching for may begin precisely where your need to force life finally ends. Perhaps one of the reasons letting go feels so frightening is that the ego often confuses control with protection. It whispers that if you stop worrying, something will go wrong. If you stop watching, someone will disappoint you. If you stop pushing, life will pass you by. If you loosen your grip, everything you care about may disappear. So you remain tense, believing that your tension is somehow holding the world together. But look gently at your own experience. How many times has worry actually protected you from tomorrow? How many nights have you sacrificed to thoughts about situations that either never happened or unfolded in ways you could never have predicted? How often have you rehearsed conversations, imagined outcomes, and prepared yourself emotionally for possibilities that existed only in your mind? The ego does this because uncertainty is difficult for it. It prefers even a painful story to an unknown future. A painful story gives it something to hold. It can say, this is why they left. This is why I failed. This is why my life turned out this way. And although the story hurts, it also creates the illusion of certainty. Awareness invites you into something much more spacious. It says, perhaps I do not need to understand everything in order to be at peace. Notice how different that feels. There are moments when you will understand why something happened. There are other moments when no explanation will ever feel complete. Someone may leave without giving you the closure you hoped for. A friendship may slowly disappear. A plan you trusted may suddenly change. You may find yourself standing in a chapter you never chose, wondering how you arrived there. The ego immediately begins searching for someone to blame. Sometimes it blames another person, sometimes it blames life, and very often it blames you. You should have known better. You should have seen the signs. You should have tried harder. You should not have trusted them. But awareness does not speak this way. Awareness looks at the same past with compassion and says, you responded with the consciousness you had at that moment. Now you can see differently. That is growth without self-punishment. You do not need to hate the person you once were in order to become more aware today. In fact, when you fight your former self, you are still fighting life. You are simply directing the force inward. Think about how often people try to force their own healing. They decide that enough time has passed, so they should no longer feel sadness. They tell themselves they should be over the relationship, over the loss, over the betrayal. They compare their healing with someone else's and wonder why they are still affected. But the heart is not a machine that obeys deadlines. A garden does not become more beautiful because you pull on the flowers. You prepare the soil, you provide light, you offer water, and then you allow growth to occur according to an intelligence that is not yours to command. Perhaps your healing deserves the same kindness. You can create the conditions for healing. You can become still. You can tell the truth about what hurt. You can forgive. You can ask for support. You can stop reopening wounds that are trying to close. But you cannot bully yourself into peace. Peace grows naturally when resistance begins to soften. And this is where awareness becomes so powerful. Awareness allows you to notice the difference between what you can influence and what you are trying to control. You can choose your words. You cannot control how another person interprets them. You can offer love. You cannot force someone to receive it. You can apologize sincerely. You cannot demand forgiveness. You can make a thoughtful decision. You cannot guarantee the outcome. You can show up honestly in a relationship. You cannot force another person to meet you with the same honesty. Much of emotional exhaustion comes from spending your energy in the second half of these equations. You keep trying to control what belongs to someone else, to time, or to life itself. Imagine carrying a bucket filled with stones everywhere you go. Each stone represents something you believe you must manage. One stone is another person's opinion of you. Another is whether someone stays. Another is whether the future follows your plan. Another is what people think about the choices you made. Another is an old mistake you believe you must somehow undo. Eventually, the bucket becomes unbearably heavy. And because you have carried it for so long, you begin believing the weight is part of who you are. But what if freedom is not learning how to become strong enough to carry the bucket forever? What if freedom is realizing that many of those stones were never yours to carry? This becomes especially clear in relationships. Perhaps there is someone in your life whose behavior has consumed your attention. You wake up thinking about what they said. You wonder why they have not called. You analyze the tone of a message. You remember who they used to be and compare that person with who they seem to be now. Without realizing it, your consciousness becomes organized around them. You tell yourself it is because you love them, and perhaps you do. But love does not require you to abandon yourself. When your peace depends entirely upon someone else's behavior, you have placed the key to your inner home in another person's hands. Then every change in them becomes a change in you. Their warmth makes you feel secure. Their distance makes you anxious. Their approval makes you feel worthy. Their silence makes you question yourself. This is not something to judge. Almost everyone experiences it in some form. We are human. We long for connection. We want to belong. But there is a deeper kind of belonging that begins when you stop abandoning your own inner presence in order to keep someone else's attention. You can love someone and still allow them to reveal who they are. You do not have to force clarity from someone whose actions are already speaking. You do not have to force closeness where there is constant distance. You do not have to force yourself to remain somewhere merely because leaving would change the story you hope to live. Sometimes peace arrives not because another person finally becomes what you wanted, but because you stop asking them to be responsible for your wholeness. And something similar happens with comparison. You look around and see someone who seems to have reached a place you have not. Perhaps they appear more certain, more loved, more spiritually grounded. Their life seems to be moving forward while yours feels paused. The ego turns this difference into a judgment. It says, you are late. But late, according to whose clock? A tree that flowers in spring is not more successful than one that changes color in autumn. Each belongs to a different rhythm. Yet human beings often look sideways so frequently that they lose contact with the rhythm of their own lives. Comparison is another subtle attempt to force yourself. You see where someone else is and immediately create pressure about where you should be. Then instead of listening inwardly, you begin living according to an external measurement. This is why reconnecting with your true self requires periods of silence, not necessarily hours of meditation. Sometimes silence means simply refusing to consult everyone else before listening to yourself. It means sitting quietly before making the next decision. It means noticing whether your desire is coming from love or from fear. It means asking, if I were not trying to impress anyone, prove anything, or avoid anyone's disappointment, what would feel true for me? You may be surprised by the answer. Perhaps you have spent much of your life pleasing people because somewhere along the way you learned that harmony meant keeping everyone happy. You became skilled at reading rooms, anticipating needs, avoiding conflict, and saying yes when something inside you was quietly saying no. People may even have praised you for it. And yet beneath all that, kindness, resentment slowly appeared. Why? Because there is a difference between giving from love and giving from fear. Love gives because giving feels aligned. Fear gives because it is terrified of what will happen if it refuses. One is freedom, the other is a hidden form of force. When you force yourself to be endlessly available, endlessly agreeable, endlessly understanding, you eventually lose contact with the person beneath all those roles. Then you may wake up one day feeling strangely disconnected from your own life. You ask, what do I actually want? What do I actually feel? And there may be silence. Do not be frightened by that silence. Silence is often where the false answers end before the true ones become audible. Stay there gently. You are not empty. You are listening. The ocean appears empty when you look only at its surface from far away, yet beneath that surface exists an entire world. Your inner life is much the same. Beneath the opinions you inherited, the expectations you absorbed, and the identities you learned to perform, there is a quieter awareness waiting to be remembered. This awareness does not need applause. It does not need to win every argument. It does not need everyone to understand your choices. It does not need to force itself into spaces where it is not welcomed. It simply knows that its worth does not rise and fall with the world's response. And when you begin touching this awareness, even briefly, your relationship with control changes. You begin to see that control is often an attempt to avoid feeling something. You control a relationship because you fear abandonment. You control your plans because you fear uncertainty. You control how others see you because you fear rejection. You replay the past because you fear accepting that it cannot be changed. So perhaps instead of asking, how can I stop being controlling, you can ask a more compassionate question. What am I afraid I will feel if I stop controlling this? That question takes you beneath the behavior. Maybe the answer is loneliness. Maybe it is grief. Maybe it is the fear that you are not enough. Maybe it is the fear that if you stop trying, no one will choose you. And here, something deeply spiritual can happen. Instead of running away from that feeling, you can sit beside it. You can become the loving presence you have been waiting for someone else to provide. You can say inwardly, I see this fear. I do not have to become it. Awareness creates a little space between you and the thought. That space may seem small, but it changes everything. The thought says, I am going to be abandoned. Awareness says, I notice that I am afraid of being abandoned. The thought says, my life is falling apart. Awareness says, I notice that my mind is telling me a frightening story about what comes next. The thought says, I must fix this now. Awareness says, I notice the urgency in me. I can breathe before I respond. You have moved from being inside the storm to witnessing the storm. The sky does not disappear because clouds move across it. Your true self is like that sky. Thoughts appear. Fear appears. Anger appears. Desire appears. Grief appears. They are real experiences, and they deserve compassion, but they are not the whole of you. There is something in you capable of noticing them, and the one who notices the fear is not the fear itself. This recognition can become the beginning of tremendous inner freedom. You no longer have to obey every thought merely because it entered your mind. You no longer have to send the message because anxiety told you to. You do not have to make the decision because fear demanded immediate certainty. You do not have to defend yourself against every misunderstanding. Sometimes you can simply wait. And waiting from awareness is very different from waiting in fear. Fearful waiting watches the clock. Trusting waiting watches the heart. There are seasons when nothing seems to be happening. You may feel as though your prayers have disappeared into silence. You may have done everything you know how to do, and still there is no clear answer. The ego interprets silence as failure, but nature does not. A seed beneath the soil appears to be doing nothing. From above, there is only earth. No flower, no branch, no visible evidence that life is moving. Yet something is happening in the darkness. Roots are forming before anything reaches toward the light. Your life may contain seasons like this. You may be developing roots you cannot yet see. Patience, discernment, self-respect, compassion, the ability to be alone without believing you have been abandoned, the ability to hear your own voice without requiring constant confirmation from others. These inner roots may eventually matter more than the outcome you were trying to force, and perhaps this is one reason life does not always answer according to your timetable. Not because you are being punished, not because you are forgotten, but because some things cannot be rushed without losing what they are trying to teach you. There is another form of forcing that deserves your awareness, the attempt to force meaning from every painful experience too quickly. Something hurts, and immediately you ask, what is the lesson? Sometimes there may be a lesson, but sometimes the loving response is simply to acknowledge that something hurt. You do not need to turn every wound into wisdom before you have allowed yourself to feel it. A person grieving a loss does not always need an explanation. Sometimes they need permission to grieve. A person whose heart has been broken does not always need to hear that everything happens for a reason. Sometimes they need silence, kindness, and time. Spirituality is not an escape from being human. It is an invitation to become fully present with being human without allowing every human experience to define the deepest truth of who you are. You can grieve and still be connected to peace. You can feel uncertainty and still trust life. You can miss someone and still release them. You can be disappointed and still remain open to love. You can have questions and still be spiritually whole. There is no contradiction here. The river can be turbulent at the surface while moving steadily toward the sea. And perhaps you are beginning to see that the opposite of forcing is not indifference. It is alignment. You still care. You still choose. You still participate. You still speak when something needs to be said. You still leave when staying requires you to betray yourself. You still take the next step when it becomes clear, but you stop insisting that your peace must depend upon what happens after that step. This is where intention becomes very different from attachment. You can hold an intention for love without forcing a particular person to fulfill it. You can hold an intention for healing without demanding that healing arrive tomorrow. You can hold an intention for a meaningful life without knowing exactly what that life will look like. You can say to the source, in whatever language feels natural to you, this is what my heart is drawn toward. I will move in that direction with love. And I am willing to release my demand that the path unfold exactly as I imagine. There is humility in this. And there is enormous strength, because now life does not have to constantly prove that you are safe. Your safety begins to come from your relationship with yourself and with the deeper presence within you. You stop asking the world to guarantee that nothing painful will happen. No one can give you that guarantee. Instead, you begin discovering something far more enduring. Whatever arrives, you can meet it consciously. You can return to your breath. You can return to awareness. You can return to love. You can return to the quiet place within you that existed before the fear began telling its story. And every time you return, you remember a little more of who you are. Not the identity that needs everyone to approve. Not the frightened mind trying to predict tomorrow. Not the wounded story repeating yesterday. Something quieter. Something spacious. Something connected. Perhaps this is the source within you, not a distant power you must convince to help you, but a presence you become aware of when the noise of resistance grows quiet enough. Then life begins to feel less like something you must conquer and more like something you can participate in. You notice the difference between a door you are lovingly knocking on and a door you are exhausting yourself trying to break down. You notice when a conversation needs honesty and when it needs silence. You notice when persistence is coming from genuine inner guidance and when it is coming from fear of letting go. And you begin trusting yourself enough to stop forcing what repeatedly asks to be released. This does not happen all at once. There may still be mornings when you wake up and immediately reach for control. There may still be moments when an unanswered message sends your mind racing, when someone's opinion unsettles you, when uncertainty feels unbearable. But now there is another possibility. You can notice, and noticing interrupts the unconscious pattern. You can place your hand over your heart and quietly ask, what am I trying to force right now? Then listen. Perhaps you are trying to force an answer. Perhaps you are trying to force someone to love you differently. Perhaps you are trying to force yourself to know what comes next. And then you can ask, what would happen inside me if just for this moment I stopped pushing? Not forever, not as a promise about tomorrow, just this moment. You may discover a small opening, a breath, a little silence. And within that silence, something that has been waiting beneath all your effort begins to emerge. Not an answer to every question, something deeper. The realization that you can be okay before the answer arrives. And once you discover that, you are ready for a different kind of journey. Not the journey of controlling life, but the journey of returning to the self that never needed control in order to be whole. And perhaps this is where the journey becomes more intimate. Because once you stop trying to control everything outside you, you begin to notice what has been waiting inside you. There may be old disappointments you never fully allowed yourself to feel. There may be resentment you have carried so long that it has begun to feel like part of your personality. There may be memories you return to again and again, hoping that somehow another visit to the past will finally make it different. But the past does not ask to be changed. It asks to be released. This is where forgiveness enters the journey, not as an obligation and not as a way of pretending that what happened was acceptable. Forgiveness is something much quieter. It is the moment you begin to realize that you no longer want yesterday to occupy so much of today. Perhaps someone hurt you deeply. They betrayed your trust. They left when you needed them. They said something that changed the way you saw yourself. Years may have passed, yet part of you still returns to the scene. You imagine what you should have said. You wonder whether they understand what they did. You hope they will someday recognize your pain. This is another form of forcing. You are trying to force the past to become something other than what it was. And because it cannot change, the struggle continues inside you. Imagine holding a burning coal because you believe someone else deserves to feel its heat. You hold it tightly, waiting for justice, waiting for acknowledgement, waiting for an apology. Yet your own hand is the one being burned. Forgiveness is opening your hand. It does not say what happened was right. It says, I will no longer injure myself by carrying this. There is extraordinary freedom in that distinction. You may never receive the apology you hope for. The person may never understand your experience. They may even continue telling a version of the story that feels completely different from yours. And there comes a moment when you have to decide whether your peace will remain dependent upon their understanding. What if it does not have to? What if you can bless the lesson, release the person, and walk forward without waiting for them to give you permission? This is not weakness. It may be one of the deepest expressions of inner strength because it means you have stopped giving another person authority over your emotional freedom. And sometimes the person you most need to forgive is yourself. Perhaps you have been carrying an old decision like a stone inside your heart. You trusted someone you wish you had not trusted. You stayed too long. You left too soon. You ignored your intuition. You spoke from anger. You missed an opportunity. You spent years living according to someone else's expectations. Now you look backward with the awareness you have today and judge the person you were then. But that person did not have today's awareness. They were learning. They were trying to survive with the understanding available to them. Perhaps they were afraid. Perhaps they wanted love. Perhaps they simply did not know another way. Could you meet that former version of yourself with compassion? Imagine sitting beside them rather than standing over them in judgment. What would you say? Would you tell them they ruined everything? Or might you say, I understand why you were afraid. I understand why you wanted to be loved. I understand why you made that choice. You do not have to keep paying for it forever. Something softens when you speak to yourself this way. And in that softness, you begin to understand that healing is not about becoming someone who never made mistakes. Healing is about no longer using your mistakes as evidence against your worth. Your true self was never damaged by the roles you played while trying to find love. It was simply covered. Like the sun behind clouds, it remained present even when you could not see it. You do not create the sun by removing the clouds. You simply become aware of what was already there. Perhaps this is what spiritual awakening really feels like. Not becoming extraordinary, but remembering something ordinary and sacred that you had forgotten. You remember that you are not merely the story of what happened to you. You are the awareness capable of witnessing that story. You are not only the rejection. You are the one who survived it. You are not only the mistake, you are the consciousness that can learn from it. You are not only the grief, you are the presence capable of holding grief with love. When you begin to recognize this, surrender becomes less frightening. Surrender has often been misunderstood as defeat. We imagine surrender means becoming passive, accepting mistreatment, or abandoning our desires. But spiritual surrender is not the surrender of your dignity. It is the surrender of your demand that reality conform to your expectations before you can be peaceful. You can surrender and still say no. You can surrender and leave. You can surrender and begin again. You can surrender and speak the truth. You can surrender and take meaningful action. What you release is not your ability to choose. You release your insistence on controlling what your choices produce. Think of a sailor on the ocean. The sailor cannot command the wind. Fighting the wind would be useless. But the sailor can adjust the sail. Your awareness is the sail. Your intention is the direction. Life is the wind. You may not control every current that carries you, but you can learn to move in relationship with what is here rather than spending your life arguing with the weather. There is a wisdom in this that the ego initially resists. The ego wants guarantees. Love asks for presence. The ego asks, will this relationship last? Love asks, can I be fully present and truthful in this relationship today? The ego asks, will everything work out? Trust asks, can I meet whatever comes without abandoning myself? The ego asks, how can I make sure I never get hurt again? Wisdom asks, can I remain open-hearted without surrendering my discernment? These are very different questions. One tries to eliminate uncertainty. The other develops a peaceful relationship with uncertainty. And that relationship changes the way you move through life. Suppose you care deeply about someone, but you sense them pulling away. The old pattern may tell you to chase. You send another message. You explain yourself again. You try to become easier to love. You replay every interaction, searching for the exact moment something changed. The more they move away, the more you move toward them. And eventually you are no longer expressing love. You are expressing fear. What would happen if you became still instead? Not as a strategy to make them return, not as a manipulation, but as an act of respect for yourself and for their freedom. You might say inwardly, I love you enough not to force you to stay, and I love myself enough not to disappear while trying to keep you. There is pain in that sentence, but there is also dignity. And beneath the pain, there may be peace, because you have returned to alignment. Alignment does not mean everything feels pleasant. It means your inner actions begin matching the truth you know in your heart. Sometimes alignment feels like staying. Sometimes it feels like leaving. Sometimes it feels like speaking. Sometimes it feels like silence. Sometimes it means trying again. Sometimes it means recognizing that you have tried enough. The mind wants a universal rule. The source speaks more quietly. That is why stillness matters. When your mind is constantly reacting, you cannot easily distinguish intuition from fear. Both can sound urgent. Both can appear convincing. But fear tends to contract you. It tells you that something must happen immediately or everything will be lost. Inner guidance often has a different quality. Even when it asks you to make a difficult choice, there is a quiet steadiness beneath it. It does not humiliate you. It does not threaten you. It does not tell you that you are worthless if things go wrong. It simply invites you toward what feels more truthful, loving, and aligned. This is why you may benefit from creating small spaces of silence in your day. You do not have to force silence either. You can simply sit for a few moments without asking anything from life. No solution, no manifestation, no demand for a sign, just presence. Feel yourself breathing. Notice the sounds around you. Allow thoughts to come and go without following every one of them. You may begin to recognize that underneath the constant movement of thought, there is an awareness that is already still. The ocean has waves, but it is more than its waves. You have thoughts, but you are more than your thoughts. You have emotions, but you are more than your emotions. You have a history, but you are more than your history. There is a depth in you that the surface storms cannot completely disturb. The more often you return there, the less urgently you need to force the outer world. Because you begin finding inside yourself what you were trying to extract from outside circumstances. You were trying to force someone to reassure you because you wanted security. You begin giving yourself presence. You were trying to force everyone to understand you because you wanted validation. You begin honoring your own truth. You were trying to force the future to reveal itself because you wanted safety. You begin discovering safety in this breath, this moment, this awareness. And something remarkable happens. Your intentions become cleaner. You still have desires, but your desires no longer carry the same desperation. There is nothing spiritually wrong with wanting something. You may want companionship. You may want healing. You may want clarity about your purpose. You may want a new chapter after a difficult season. Desire itself does not create suffering. Attachment to the belief that your wholeness depends upon fulfilling that desire is where suffering often begins. You can plant a seed without standing over the soil demanding that it grow. You choose good soil. You water it. You give it light. And then you trust an intelligence within the seed that you did not create. Perhaps your intentions can be held this way. You participate. You show up. You become honest about what your heart is asking for. And then you leave room for life to surprise you. This is especially important when it comes to purpose. Many people force themselves to discover a grand purpose because they believe their lives are incomplete without one. They search for the perfect calling, the perfect path, the one thing they were born to do. And while they are searching, they miss the sacredness of what is already here. Perhaps purpose is not always a destination. Perhaps sometimes your purpose is simply the quality of consciousness you bring to this moment. Can you bring kindness into the conversation you are having today? Can you listen to someone without preparing your response? Can you forgive yourself for being imperfect? Can you offer peace instead of adding another layer of conflict? Can you be fully present with someone who needs to be seen? These things may never appear impressive, but perhaps the source does not measure life by impressiveness. A candle does not ask whether its light is important enough. It simply gives light. You may find that when you stop forcing yourself to discover your purpose, purpose begins expressing itself through the way you live. It appears in compassion, in presence, in honesty, in love. And slowly, you begin trusting the flow of your own life. Trust does not mean believing that nothing difficult will happen. That kind of trust would be fragile because life includes loss, aging, change, disappointment, and endings. The tree trusts winter not because winter is warm, but because winter belongs to the cycle. There are winters in your life too. There are periods when things fall away, rows change, children grow, bodies age, relationships evolve. People you love may leave this world. Dreams that once gave your life direction may no longer feel alive. The ego sees these changes and asks, how can I stop this? But life has never promised permanence. Everything visible changes. Perhaps suffering deepens when we demand permanence from what was always meant to move. This does not mean you should love less. It means perhaps you can love more deeply because you understand that nothing needs to belong to you forever in order to be sacred. Think of a sunset. You do not become angry because it lasts only a short while. Its impermanence is part of its beauty. You look, you receive, you appreciate, and then you allow the sky to change. What if you could bring some of that tenderness to the changing seasons of your own life? Instead of asking, how do I keep this forever? You might ask, how can I love this fully while it is here? That question changes relationships. You become less possessive and more present. You stop trying to freeze people into the versions of themselves that made you comfortable. You allow them to grow, and you allow yourself to grow too. There may be people who loved an older version of you but struggle with the person you are becoming. You may feel tempted to shrink yourself back into an old identity so they will remain comfortable. But this too is forcing. You are forcing yourself backward to preserve a relationship with someone who may be attached to who you used to be. Growth sometimes asks for courage, not the courage to prove yourself, the courage to stop explaining yourself endlessly, the courage to say, this is where I am now, and then allow others to respond as they will. Some will understand, some will not. Some may walk beside you for another season. Others may take a different road. You do not have to turn every departure into rejection. Sometimes paths simply separate. And perhaps one of the most peaceful things you can remember is that not every ending requires a villain. You do not have to hate someone in order to release them. You do not have to rewrite the beautiful parts of a relationship merely because it ended. You can say, this mattered. I learned here, I loved here, I heard here. And now I am willing to let this chapter become what it already is, part of my past. This is forgiveness joined with surrender. And then gratitude begins to emerge. not forced gratitude, not the kind that tells you to be thankful for pain before you are ready. A quieter gratitude. You begin noticing that even difficult chapters revealed something about you. You discovered what you value. You discovered where you had abandoned yourself. You discovered what kind of love feels peaceful and what kind keeps you in constant fear. You discovered that you could survive an ending you once believed would destroy you. You discovered that loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. You discovered that silence can contain companionship when you are no longer afraid of your own presence. And perhaps most importantly, you discovered that the source did not disappear when your plans did. It was there in the morning after the disappointment. It was there in the breath you took when you thought you could not take another. It was there in the unexpected kindness of someone who appeared at the right moment. It was there in your capacity to begin again. Maybe you were never as abandoned as fear told you. Maybe life was not withholding peace from you. Maybe peace was quietly waiting beneath your resistance. This does not mean you will never force again. You are human. There will be moments when fear returns and tells you to tighten your grip. When that happens, you do not need to judge yourself. You can notice the contraction and return. Return to the breath. Return to awareness. Return to forgiveness. Return to the question, what would love do here if it did not need to control the outcome? Sometimes love will speak. Sometimes love will wait. Sometimes love will create a boundary. Sometimes love will walk away. Sometimes love will simply sit quietly beside your uncertainty. There is no formula. There is presence. And the more present you become, the less you need formulas because you begin trusting the intelligence within you. You begin remembering who you were beneath all the conditioning. Before you learned that approval meant worth. Before you learned that control meant safety. Before you learned that holding on meant love. There was something simpler, a natural openness, a willingness to experience life before the mind divided everything into success and failure, winning and losing, acceptance and rejection. That openness has not vanished. It has simply been covered by years of protection. And now you are not trying to become that true self. You are remembering it. You are removing what obscures it, one resentment at a time, one fearful attachment at a time, one unnecessary demand at a time. You are discovering that you can care deeply without gripping tightly. You can intend without insisting. You can love without possessing. You can forgive without returning to what harmed you. You can release without becoming cold. You can trust without knowing. And perhaps that final one is where the greatest freedom lives. You can trust without knowing. You do not know exactly what next year will bring. You do not know which people will remain. You do not know which plans will change. You do not know how every unanswered question will resolve itself. But right now, you are here, breathing, aware, alive. And perhaps this moment is enough to meet this moment. You do not need tomorrow's strength today. You need only the presence to meet what is here. The rest can arrive when it arrives. Imagine how much lighter life becomes when you stop carrying futures that have not happened. Imagine waking tomorrow without immediately asking life to prove that everything will be okay. Instead, you might quietly say, whatever this day brings, let me meet it from love rather than fear. Let me recognize what is mine to do and what is mine to release. Let me remain close to the peaceful presence within me. Then you step into the day, not powerless, not passive, simply unburdened by the belief that you must control everything. And perhaps you begin to notice something you could not see while you were struggling. Life has been moving all along. The river never stopped. You were simply gripping the bank because you were afraid of where the current might take you. Now your hands begin to open. Not because you know where the river leads, but because you are beginning to trust the deeper presence that travels with you. And as you release your grip, you may discover that surrender was never about losing yourself. It was the way back to yourself. And now, as you begin to see that surrender is not losing yourself, but returning to yourself, the question becomes very simple. How do you live this understanding when ordinary life begins again? How do you remember it when the phone rings? When someone disappoints you, when an old fear returns, when plans change, or when you wake in the middle of the night and your mind begins searching for answers. Perhaps you do not need to hold on to every idea you have heard. Perhaps you only need to remember how to return. Each morning, before you enter the noise of the world, you might give yourself a few moments of stillness. You do not need to ask the day to go your way. You do not need to predict what will happen. Simply notice that you are here. Feel the breath entering and leaving your body. Notice the silence beneath the sounds around you, and perhaps offer one quiet intention. Today, let me recognize what I am trying to force. That alone can become a spiritual practice. Because throughout the day, you will notice moments of contraction. Someone does not respond the way you hoped. A plan changes unexpectedly. You see another person's life and begin questioning your own. An old memory appears. Suddenly, the mind says, fix this, control this, make this different. Before following that voice, become still for one breath. Ask yourself, is this love speaking, or is this fear trying to create certainty? You do not have to judge the answer. If it is fear, simply notice it. Awareness itself begins loosening the knot. There will also be moments when gratitude can return you to the present. Gratitude does not require you to deny what hurts. It simply reminds you that pain is not the only thing here. Perhaps there is sunlight coming through the window. Perhaps someone loves you quietly. Perhaps your body carried you through another day. Perhaps there is water to drink, a place to rest, a tree outside, a familiar voice, or simply another breath arriving without your effort. Life contains so much that you never had to force. The sun rose without your management. Your heart continued beating while you slept. The seasons changed without consulting your plans. Maybe this can remind you that not everything depends upon you. There is an intelligence moving through life that existed before your worries and will remain after they have passed. You might call this intelligence the source. And perhaps living in harmony with the source simply means becoming less resistant to the movement of life. When something beautiful arrives, receive it. When something changes, allow yourself to feel the change. When something ends, grieve honestly. When forgiveness becomes possible, release what you no longer need to carry. When you do not know, let yourself not know. There is such freedom in saying, I do not know yet. You do not have to fill every silence with an answer. You do not have to fill every absence with fear. You do not have to turn every delay into rejection. Sometimes life is simply unfinished. And unfinished does not mean wrong. Remember the seed beneath the soil. If you looked at it too soon, you might conclude that nothing was happening. Yet hidden from view, life was organizing itself. There may be places within you doing the same. Something may be healing that you cannot yet name. Something may be leaving because you have outgrown it. Something may be becoming clearer precisely because you have stopped chasing an immediate answer. Allow some things to remain beneath the soil. And when you notice resentment returning, practice forgiveness again. Forgiveness may not be one grand moment. Sometimes it is a choice you make repeatedly. You remember, you feel the old pain, and instead of feeding the story again, you say, I release my demand that the past should have been different. Then you return to now. You may have to do this many times. That is all right. You are not failing because an old feeling returns. The ocean does not fail because another wave reaches the shore. Let the feeling arrive. Witness it, and let it move. Your peace does not depend upon having no waves. It comes from remembering that you are deeper than the waves. And when you find yourself trying to force another person, return to love. Ask whether you are giving them freedom to be who they are. This does not mean accepting behavior that violates your dignity. Love can create boundaries. Love can say no. Love can leave. But love does not need to control. You can say, I cannot choose for you, but I can choose how I will participate. That is where your freedom lives. Not in controlling their decision, in becoming conscious of your own. Little by little, your life begins to feel different. Perhaps nothing dramatic changes on the outside. You still have responsibilities. People still misunderstand you. Some doors still close. Some questions remain unanswered. But inside, there is more space. You no longer chase every thought. You no longer treat every uncertainty as an emergency. You stop begging yesterday to change. You stop asking tomorrow to guarantee your safety. You begin living here. And here is where life has always been. There is no past except the one appearing as memory now. There is no future except the one appearing as imagination now. There is this breath, this awareness, this opportunity to choose love instead of fear. Perhaps that is enough. And perhaps one day you will look back at something you desperately wanted to force and feel gratitude that life did not obey you. You may realize that the closed door redirected you. The ending returned you to yourself. The silence taught you to listen. The uncertainty taught you trust. The person who could not love you in the way you hoped taught you that your worth was never theirs to determine, and you may smile gently at the version of yourself who once believed everything had to happen a certain way. You will not judge that person. You will understand them. They were afraid. They were trying to be safe. They had forgotten that there was something deeper within them. And now you remember. You do not have to force the river. You do not have to command the seasons. You do not have to pull open every flower. You do not have to chase what is moving away or demand that what has ended begin again. You can participate fully. You can love deeply. You can choose consciously. You can plant your seeds with intention, and then you can leave room for life. Leave room for mystery. Leave room for another path. Leave room for the source to reveal possibilities your frightened mind could never have planned. When you wake tomorrow, perhaps carry only this with you. Do what feels aligned with love, and release your demand to control what happens next. If there is something to say it with kindness. If there is something to forgive, begin releasing it. If there is something you cannot change, stop asking your heart to fight it forever. If there is something beautiful before you, be present enough to receive it. And when you forget, return. Return to stillness. Return to gratitude. Return to awareness. Return to love. Return as many times as necessary, because the spiritual path may not be about reaching a place where fear never appears again. Perhaps it is about remembering where home is whenever fear carries you away. Home is the peaceful presence beneath the noise. Home is the awareness beneath the story. Home is the love that does not need to prove itself. Home is the source within you. You were never trying to become this presence. You were remembering that it had always been there. So allow your hands to open. Allow your shoulders to soften. Allow this moment to be what it is. You do not have to know where every road leads. You only need enough awareness to take the step that belongs to you and enough trust to release the steps that do not. Life will continue moving. People will come and go. Seasons will change. Your understanding will deepen. And through all of it, there will remain a quiet place within you that does not need to force anything in order to be whole. Perhaps that is the freedom you were searching for all along. If this reflection speaks to something you are living through, you are welcome to share in the comments what you are learning to release. Your reflection may become the reminder someone else needs today. And if you would like to continue exploring inner peace, forgiveness, awareness, love, and the quiet wisdom already within you, you can subscribe and return for another journey. Until then, trust what does not need to be forced. Love what is here while it is here. Release what has completed its season. And remember that peace was never hiding somewhere in the future, waiting for life to finally go your way. It was here, beneath the fear, beneath the resistance, beneath all the effort to control what comes next, quietly waiting for you to come home.